just going to lay my board flat and just run through a nice little exercise that I use sometimes just to get rid of painter's block. You know, if you're kind of stuck for something to paint, it's quite a nice little exercise to do. So I just grab the mist bottle and I wet the paper all over, quite wet, so almost leaving puddles of water on the surface there. I'm just going to grab quite a large brush. Just going to use a mop brush. It's a synthetic mop, and just pick up some ultramarine cobalt blue, and then mix the well up of that, quite wet. Add some burnt sienna to it too, and don't mix it too well, so it'll kind of separate hopefully when it hits the water. Then just squeeze that onto the surface and allow it to move around. Pick up even more blue, and again just squeeze it on, let it fall wherever it wants and find its own level. It's quite a nice little exercise because it kind of takes a lot of the decisions out of your hands. So I mean, I know I want to paint a landscape of some sort, so just dropping paint on and allowing it to sit and move around, mix together, and it should separate. Some of it hopefully will granulate. And so just put in some more burnt sienna, bring that across the bottom there. And as I was saying, this kind of exercise just takes the decisions out of your hands, so you can just create some, what's really, it's going to look like an absolute mess, to be honest, to start off with. But once you dry it, you can then have a look, make some decisions, see what shapes have formed, and then maybe add some tree trunks, maybe a bit of distance. All depends basically what happens in this first stage. So if you're stuck for something to paint, it's a nice simple little exercise. You can do it on the back of a failed painting, something like that as well. And so pretty much I'm just dipping into blue, so ultramarine cobalt blue, burnt sienna, and a touch of raw sienna here and there as well, which is pretty much my favourite triad of colours really, especially for painting landscapes. And still just dropping it on. And I might pick up the board and move it around in a minute. I mean, as you can see, it looks like a total mess at the moment, but I'll move the board around and I'll probably grab some paper towel as well and move it around with that. It's so warm here today that the paper is actually starting to dry out already, so I'll just give it another mist. And just pick up even more blue paint, add it to what's in the palette there already. Just drop that on the other side. I mean, I know it doesn't really look like it now, but already I'm thinking this could be a woodland scene. So just using this random approach just to get some colour, which will fade and sit back, and then that can be quite a nice backdrop. So just grab some paper towel and just blot the paint around, move it around, kind of almost using it like a sponge, just to push the paint down into the paper and create some sort of quite nice effects. So I'm already thinking that there could be some foliage forming maybe that I can use. And then down in the at the bottom there, I mean, just smudge that across. That could be some ground. So I move the paint around and also blot a few areas out as well. Making sure that I do leave some light behind, so in the middle there, just make sure I don't overdo that, and then just leave some areas of the white paper shining through. Okay, I'll dry that off. I'll get the heat gun on that and dry it quickly. Okay, I'm just going to adjust the angle of my board now and bring it up to round about 30 degrees, maybe 25-30 degrees, something like that. And I'm now just going to re-wet the surface. And now it's fully dried. You can see that the paint is separated. You can see a nice little bit of raw sienna separated out and it's glowing in the middle. And the land area down there, that should be quite a nice base essentially, just to lay some darker kind of tree shapes over the top. So I switched to a smaller calligraphy brush and just mixed up a blue-grey and re-wet the paper again. Like I said a little while ago, it's so warm here today that the paper's dry, and as soon as the paint hits it, and so just bringing in some vertical strokes really that should act as some distant trees. Need to give it another spray. I said it's drying out as soon as the paint hits the paper. I think just put a tree at an angle there as well, just cutting across. And so making them ever slightly darker as well, just here and there, just to give a sense of depth. So having some light ones receding in the distance and just getting ever so slightly darker as we come towards the foreground. So again, just laying down some more tree shapes, give it another spritz, just to soften everything off. I think I really want to save my hard edges just for my darkest trees, which will be closest, so more in the foreground. So I just switched to a slightly larger brush. I think it's a size 8 sable. And so mix up some darker paint, ultramarine, burnt sienna. And very quick strokes, just bringing the brush straight down. Essentially just trying to find a composition within that first wash. So looking at the shapes that are left behind and then leaving some of it behind, sort of shining through, so the blue from that wash is giving a nice sense of distance. And where there's some brown there, I'll just bring a trunk straight through that. I mean, maybe those brown bits will look like some leaves on the edge of the tree once I put some branches on. And also bringing these tree trunks down, leaving some broken edges, so using a dry brush technique. And I'll switch back to the smaller brush and just put a few thinner trees in there. And one maybe is right on the edge of the sheet there. And I'll just put a few branches in as well. I'll mix up some quite dark paint now. It's almost black. And then just bring out just loads of branches either side of the trunks. And some coming out horizontal, some going up slightly, some facing slightly downwards. Just mix it up. I'll put a few darker trees just on the left hand side now. Paper's dried out again, so just another spritz with a bottle. Kind of always amazes me really what you can get away with when painting trees. You can be very kind of quick with a brush and just move it around, kind of very random strokes really, and still end up with something that looks like a tree. I'm just going to mix up some even darker paint now. It's about as dark as I can go with ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm just going to spritz the bottom of the paper all over, just use my arm there to shield it. And I just bring some dark all the way across the foreground. And just vary that mix slightly with a bit more burnt sienna, make it a touch browner. And again, that paint's drying as pretty much as soon as it's touching the paper there, so just get the bottle on it again. And just flick up a few kind of random little branches. And I'll just darken up that tree going across there. I quite like that, and it was getting a little bit lost, so again, get the spray bottle on it and just allow some of that water to run down. It might make some interesting marks. I think the bottom of those trees have got a little bit lost as well, so just add some darker paint and just bring that through. I mean, because it's sort of a very experimental way of painting, I suppose. So you never really know what you're going to get. So you have to kind of work with it, I suppose, how as you go. So just put a few darker branches on. And just out of all the mess really, trying to find a composition amongst it. It's a kind of very free way of painting. If you have no reference photo, I mean, I've painted woodland scenes 1,000 times before, so I know roughly what I want to achieve. So just grab another piece of paper towel and spritz the whole thing again because it's dried off extremely quickly. So I'm just going to use the paper towel almost like a sponge, I suppose, and just dab on just a few areas of foliage, just make a few random marks, and just pick up all that paint that's in the well there. I mean, it mostly soaks into the towel really, but it still makes a nice, just adds a little bit extra layer of interest. And just mix up a little bit more paint. Same again, ultramarine, burnt sienna. And so while I go, I'm just going to use the paper towel just to blot out a few areas as well, and just add a little bit of light, kind of maybe a bit of a misty effect. I wasn't too happy with that foreground anyway, kind of a little bit too straight, so just blot out a few areas, and that just adds a bit of texture as well. And that's another thing I like about doing this kind of thing, is there are no right, there is no right, there's no wrong, and especially if you do it on the back of an old painting, you've got nothing to lose, so really you can just go for it and be quite expressive. And so just adding a little bit more texture really. I think the way it's looking, I can get away with bringing that over most of the painting. And so even more dark paint, so same mix as before. I'll just strengthen just a couple of the tree trunks and just add a little bit of texture, a few harder edges, and then just bring a little bit of texture down into the foreground as well. It's an old calligraphy brush I'm using here, and it's quite beaten up, so it just makes kind of interesting marks on its own. Just being sort of quite rough with it. I always like to keep old brushes for sort of texture, woodlands and painting trees, etc. They kind of make marks that you wouldn't really be able to achieve with a new brush. And so just bring a couple more branches out here and there. I mean, usually when I paint, if I've got an idea of exactly what I want to do, I work on the basis of not trying to overwork it. But for some reason, I do this kind of thing, these kind of exercises. It's usually quite difficult to know when to stop. It's sort of quite a fun thing to do. But I'll leave it at that. I think I've gone far enough, so I'll just dry that off. I'll just take the tape out from around the outside. And I think overall I'm quite happy with that. From what started out as essentially nothing, just dropping paint randomly onto the wet paper and then allowing it to move around and find its own level, bearing in mind the colour choices. So using a triad really of blue, burnt sienna, raw sienna, and then just making pretty much the whole painting out of those three colours. You can't really go wrong with colour harmony. And so it's quite an interesting little exercise to do, especially if you're stuck for ideas and maybe you don't know what to paint, you've got a bit of artist block. So give it a go and let me know what you think. Let me know if you want to see more of this kind of thing, or if you've got anything that you'd like me to cover, do let me know, and if I can, I'll try and make it happen. And you can follow me over on Patreon if you don't already, and also I've got a YouTube membership. You can follow me on there as well. It'd be good to see some of you over there. So until next week, happy painting and bye for now.